Hello, this is Jean Marie Ward for Buzzy Magazine. With me today is beloved fantasy author Delia Sherman, whose latest novel, The Freedom Maze, is a 2011 Norton Award nominee. Congratulations, Delia, and good luck tonight. I understand The Freedom Maze was born in a dream. What was the dream about, and how much of it made its way to the finished novel?
Well, the dream was I was in Maine, which is not where I live, for a year with my partner who was teaching, and I was very homesick for Massachusetts and for that entire world. So I dreamt I was back in my old house and I was looking out at my garden, and except that I was sitting in the window seat of my study and looking out over the garden, except that it wasn't my garden, it was a maze. And it was definitely a garden that I had not planted, and it was definitely not a Massachusetts garden. And when I was reading a book as I sat in the window seat, and I don't remember what the book was, but it was a fascinating story, and it was writing itself as I was reading. And there was a figure of some sort that was laughing at me, and it was one of those kind of non-narrative, conceptual, fuzzy around the edges dreams. And when I woke up, it stuck with me, unlike most dreams of mine, which completely disappear the minute I get out of bed. And but what I retained the most clearly was the image of the maze. And that's really the only thing. The image of Sophie sitting in the window seat in her grandmother's house, looking out over this ruined plantation and seeing a maze, both in its current ruined state, and then there's one scene where she looks back in time and sees it. And she also sees another garden, a completely different garden, and slave quarters, and this, that, and the other thing, which were not in the dream. But I really wanted to, that central image I knew I needed to write about, and it took me many years to figure out how to do it.
Sometimes things do grow slowly in the brain, while the what Jennifer Crusie calls the girls in the basement are working on it. The novel ultimately wound up being in Louisiana instead of Massachusetts, right? And how did the transposition come about? How did the maze go from being in Massachusetts to Louisiana?
Well, it was definitely not a Massachusetts garden that I was looking at. It was not. It was. The first time when I first started writing this novel, this was in 1987, so I am dealing with memories that are very much blunted by time. But I think I started to think about a girl in Massachusetts seeing this thing in a dream that was in another place, and I thought secondary world. From all of the books that I had read growing up, there's a lot of things where, like Tom's Midnight Garden, where you look out and you see another time, another place. And finally, I realized that it was a southern garden, and that there were some things that I wanted to say about family, about the Civil War, about, well, not the Civil War so much, because it's not a novel about the war itself. It's more about the causes of the Civil War and the society that gave birth to the Civil War. And both my mother's and my father's families are Southern, but my mother's had roots in Louisiana, and I had spent time there. And I had been traveling there, and it just, it all accrued. It's like a snowball of story, and you can't tell when you make a single decision, but it just became clear to me that eventually I found myself writing this thing set in Louisiana.
Your activist book, as you call it. And did the Louisiana setting affect the identity of the creature, the trickster figure that leads Sophie into the maze?
It did, but not entirely consciously. I think that I do not usually work by pure inspiration. I work by deduction and a series of decisions that I can find myself making over time. But when I needed a magical creature, and I knew, because I was riffing off of E. Nesbit and Edward Eger, that I wanted a magical creature like the Samiad or the one of the other creatures that pops up, the Natterjack in the Time Garden. And I was writing along, and I knew it was time for this magical creature to show up, and literally it just came out my pen. I had no idea where it came from. I had not thought about it. I had not considered it. It was one of those moments where you're writing along and your back brain goes, here, I've made some decisions in your absence. Would you like them? It's those magic moments that really makes writing so much fun. It doesn't happen nearly as often as I would like it to.
I think it's not giving away anything of the plot to say that Sophie starts the Freedom Maze in the 1960s.
Yes.
What is it about the 1960s you find so appealing? Sophie starts out there. It's the era of your New York Between books, Changeling and The Magic Mirror of the Mermaid Queen. What about the period so fascinating for you?
Well, there are actually three answers to that. The first one has to do with Freedom Maze, and it is more that in 1860 the Civil War started. In 1960, although there had been incidents in the Civil Rights Movement, there were certainly came to a head in 1860. There was a great deal that happened in 1960 in the Civil Rights Movement, and therefore 1960, 1860, there was no decision to be made. The secondary thing is that I didn't have to do as much research because I was a little younger than Sophie at that time. But that's when I grew up. That is when I became a conscious thinking human being in the 60s. I was not yet a teenager, but I was a child in a world that I was beginning to see. I grew up in the 50s, but when you're up until you're 9 or 10 or 11, unless your parents are very connected to the outer world, which mine were not, you don't really know very much. You know, this is just your little world, and when you first start to realize that there's a world out there and there are people who aren't you and they have different lives and they have different ways of thinking, I think that's when you really start to become a human being in that particular way. And that's my era. That I am a child of the 60s in a way that I'm not. The 70s to me was simply an outgrowth of the 60s and graduate school.
Oh, hell on earth when you lose the ability to read for pleasure.
Exactly. So the 60s really was my era, and although I did not, New York Between is a timeless place. I think of Neef as having been stolen. She's a modern child. You know, that because none of the book actually takes place in the New York that we live in, she could come from anywhere. But what New York Between does is that it takes all of the legends about New York and it makes them real. So it's not only the folklore that the immigrants from years past have brought with them when they have come from other shores, and this is where that folklore lives. It is also Damon Runyon's New York. It is also the beat. I really do have to write a New York Between stories about the village because it's like beatniks for days. It hasn't even, there's some parts of it that are a little the 60s, but it is not the village that we are now. It's all the legends about the village. And that's what New York Between is. They still have the old Metropolitan Opera in New York Between, and they still have the old Rockefeller Center where the Rockettes are constantly playing. Because it didn't used to be 2 shows a year. It was all the time. You could always go to Rockefeller Center, and that was where the big blockbuster movies played when I was growing up. So it is the New York I grew up in, which was magical. And it is also this timeless place where all of these things, these legends that I have read about New York all my life have come to rest.